My name is Alex, and I'm 32 years old. What I'm about to tell you might sound like a scene from a bad movie, but I assure you, every raw, heartbreaking detail is true. It's a story about family, about trust, and about how quickly the bonds you thought were unbreakable can shatter into a million pieces. You see, when someone you love deeply passes away, you expect grief to be the heaviest burden. You don't expect to discover a betrayal so profound it twists your entire understanding of those closest to you. The air still tasted of damp earth and stale lilies from Grandma Rose's funeral, a few weeks past. Her little cottage, nestled amongst overgrown roses, usually hummed with warmth and the scent of baking bread. Now it was eerily quiet, the silence punctuated only by the occasional creak of old floorboards or the distant cry of a mourning dove. My sister, Eleanor, sat across from me in the living room, her usually bright eyes clouded with what I initially believed was sorrow. She was meticulously sorting through Grandma's keepsakes, her movements almost too precise, too deliberate for someone so freshly bereaved. "It's just so much," she'd murmured, her voice thin, as she folded a delicate lace handkerchief. Grandma had so many things, didn't she? So many memories. I watched her, a knot tightening in my stomach. Something felt off. Lawyers had called. Estate managers had sent emails. And yet, the topic of Grandma's will, the one she'd always been so open about, remained curiously absent from Eleanor's lips. She'd always been the pragmatic one, the one who handled everything. But now she was evasive, deflecting every gentle inquiry about the next steps. It was as if the very word will was a foreign, forbidden concept in our grief-stricken home. And that silence, more than any argument, was deafening. The silence felt like a heavy blanket, suffocating the last vestiges of comfort in Grandma's home. I watched Eleanor, her fingers tracing the faded embroidery on a pillow. "Ellie," I began, my voice softer than I intended. "Have you heard anything from Mr. Henderson, the lawyer? About the will?" Her hand froze. Just for a flicker, a brief, almost imperceptible hesitation, but I saw it. Her shoulders stiffened and she didn't look up. "No, not really, Alex," she murmured, her voice strangely flat. "I imagine it takes time. These things always do, don't they?" I pushed a little further, my unease growing into a dull ache behind my eyes. Grandma Rose always said it was all straightforward. She even told us where she kept her copy, remember? In that old wooden box with her sewing supplies. I gestured vaguely towards the small antique sewing box that sat on a shelf near the fireplace, a familiar fixture since childhood. Eleanor finally looked up, her gaze meeting mine, but her eyes were guarded, almost cold. "Alex, please," she sighed, her tone edged with a weary impatience I hadn't heard before. "Can we just not? It's too soon. Let's just grieve. We can deal with the paperwork later." Her dismissal felt like a physical slap. Grandma Rose had been meticulous about everything, especially her affairs. She'd made it clear years ago that her will was updated, explicitly stating her wishes for her small inheritance, a mix of antique furniture, some savings, and the cottage itself. She often joked about it, about ensuring her little angels were taken care of. And now Eleanor, always the pragmatist, the one who handled everything logistical, was suddenly vague, evasive, almost aggressively dismissive of the topic. It was entirely out of character for her, and it sent a chill down my spine. Later that evening, long after Eleanor had retired to her room, claiming a headache, I found myself drawn back to the living room. The moonlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the familiar objects. A sense of wrongness, a cold dread, settled around me. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself it was just grief, paranoia. But the image of Eleanor's stiff posture, the forced casualness of her voice, replayed in my mind like a broken record. My gaze drifted again to the little wooden sewing box. It looked innocent enough, a repository of threads, needles, thimbles. But Grandma Rose had been specific. My intuition, a quiet whisper at first, was now a persistent clamor in my head, telling me something was deeply, fundamentally amiss. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The air seemed to hum with unspoken secrets, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the truth lay hidden, not in a lawyer's office, but somewhere within these very walls. I stood there, bathed in pale moonlight, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm. Every instinct screamed to leave it alone, to respect Eleanor's wishes, to let grief run its course. But the memory of Grandma Rose's knowing wink about her important papers in that very box overruled rational thought. My feet carried me forward, a quiet defiance growing in my chest, a desperate need to dispel the ugly suspicion. The worn wood of the sewing box felt cool beneath my fingertips, smooth from decades of Grandma's hands. With a soft click, the brass clasp yielded. The lid lifted, revealing familiar chaos. Spools of vibrant thread, tarnished thimbles, needles tucked into a velvet strawberry. It was all so utterly normal, exactly as it had always been. For a moment, relief washed over me. Perhaps I was paranoid, haunted by loss. I began to gently sift, the comforting scent of old cotton and lavender rising, a ghost of Grandma's practical world. Then my fingers brushed against something stiff, tucked deep beneath embroidery floss. Paper, folded precisely. My breath hitched. With slow, deliberate movements, I pushed aside spools, eyes fixed on the narrow, cream-colored envelope emerging. This was different. This had weight. As I pulled it free, a name printed neatly on the front leaped out. Last Will and Testament of Rose Eleanor Vance. My hand trembled. Moonlight illuminated faint crinkles. It was addressed to Mr. Henderson, the lawyer Eleanor had dismissed hours ago, the one Grandma had always trusted. Ice-cold dread washed over me, chasing away the brief relief. This wasn't a copy. It was the copy, the one Grandma spoke of, the one Eleanor had so casually claimed hadn't materialized. The implications hit me. Eleanor, I whispered to the empty room, her name tasting like ash. What have you done? The crisp paper of the envelope felt like fire in my hand, a shocking contrast to the soft fabric of Grandma's sewing box. Last Will and Testament of Rose Eleanor Vance. The words swam, heavy with accusation, undeniable proof of Eleanor's deceit. My fingers tightened, crushing the paper. Every evasive glance, strained sigh, quick change of subject from her now replayed, not as grief, but as meticulously crafted lies. The quiet room thickened with this revelation. My own sister, who'd held my hand through scraped knees, had hidden something vital to our peace. A bitter taste filled my mouth. How could she? What kind of person orchestrates such a betrayal after a beloved grandmother's death? It wasn't just about possessions. It was the deliberate withholding of truth, the manipulation of trust. I remembered Grandma Rose's sparkling eyes as she'd spoken of her plans, wanting everything just so, ensuring no squabbles, only love. She'd placed so much faith in our bond, and Eleanor had seemingly trampled it. The moonbeams, once comforting, now felt like harsh spotlights, illuminating my shattering world. My eyes scanned the elegant script, Mr. Henderson. The name Eleanor had brushed off with such a casual wave. No, not really, Alex, she'd said, her voice flat. That flatness, once attributed to shock, now screamed calculated indifference. It was a practiced dismissal, designed to throw me off. She wasn't just grieving, she was acting. And the sheer audacity of it, to do it within Grandma's walls, surrounded by her memory, made my stomach churn. I carefully unfolded the document, a tremor running through my hands, partly from adrenaline, partly from despair. The first few lines confirmed my worst fears. The legal preamble, the date of signing, the official seals. This was legitimate. This was a two. But the specifics of Grandma's legacy remained hidden beneath the folded pages. Did I even want to know? What if it revealed something more sinister, solidifying Eleanor's guilt or worse, complicating my own standing, fueling her motive? Familiar objects in the room now seemed imbued with a sinister aura. The antique clock, its gentle tick-tock mocking my frantic heart. The worn armchair where Grandma always sat, a phantom presence observing the unraveling of her family. My sister, sleeping peacefully just rooms away, oblivious or perfectly aware of the seismic shift. A cold, hard resolve began to form. I couldn't let this stand. Not for Grandma, not for the truth, and certainly not for the fragmented remains of my trust. I knew, with sickening clarity, the peace in this house was a fragile illusion, about to shatter. The will felt like a ticking time bomb. My fingers, still trembling, carefully smoothed the creased edges of the document. The moonlight, now a silent silver accomplice, illuminated the fine print, each word a step further into a truth I hadn't wanted to believe. The top of the first page held the usual formal declarations, but then a familiar name. Not mine, not Eleanor's, but a third. Our cousin, Robert. My breath hitched. Robert? Grandma had always been fond of him, yes, but he lived hundreds of miles away, rarely visited. What role could he possibly play in her final wishes? A sudden, chilling understanding began to dawn, a new, unsettling piece of the puzzle falling into place. My gaze skimmed past the legal boilerplate, searching for the heart of it, and there it was, laid out in cold, undeniable terms. Grandma Rose had bequeathed the cottage, her most prized possession, not equally to Eleanor and me, as we had always assumed, but to Robert. To Robert. A sharp, disorienting pain shot through me, not just of loss, but of profound confusion. Why? Why would she do that? Eleanor, always so meticulous, so sure of her place in Grandma's affections, would have been devastated by this. A small handwritten note tucked into the margins of the will itself caught my eye. Grandma's distinct looping script, a whisper from beyond the grave. My dearest Alex and Eleanor, it began, her familiar tenderness aching in every curve of the letters. I know this may come as a surprise. The cottage holds many memories, but Robert needs a fresh start, a home he can truly call his own, away from the city's rush. I have ensured that your shares of my savings will more than compensate for the sentimental value of these walls. This is not a slight, my darlings, but an act of hope for a soul who has struggled. The words seemed to echo in the silent room, a gentle, almost apologetic explanation from a woman I thought I knew completely. It was classic Grandma Rose, selfless, always thinking of others, especially those she felt were most vulnerable. My initial shock began to morph, shifting from confusion about Robert to a fresh, bitter understanding of Eleanor's actions. This wasn't a malicious slight against us. It was a testament to Grandma's boundless empathy. But Eleanor would have seen it differently. To her, the cottage was an inheritance, a right, a legacy. To relinquish it, even for Robert, even with a larger share of savings, would have felt like a profound injustice. The quiet of the house intensified, absorbing the shockwaves of this revelation. Eleanor's evasiveness, her panicked dismissal of the will's existence, no longer seemed inexplicable. It was a desperate act of self-preservation, a frantic attempt to rewrite Grandma's narrative. She hadn't just hidden the will, she had suppressed a truth that threatened her sense of entitlement, her very identity as the responsible granddaughter who deserved the lion's share. My sister, the pragmatist, was actually driven by a deep, insecure fear of being overlooked. I reread Grandma's note, tracing her words with a detached finger. Not a slight, but an act of hope. The irony was a punch to the gut. Grandma, in her generosity, had unwittingly ignited a powder keg of resentment. Eleanor's betrayal wasn't a random act of greed, but a calculated move born from a sense of perceived injustice. It didn't excuse her, but it cast a chilling light on the depth of her disappointment, the lengths she would go to maintain her version of reality. The quiet whisper of her name on my lips earlier now felt like a heavy accusation, laden with the weight of shattered trust and a family fractured beyond recognition. The cold, hard reality of the document in my hand felt heavier than any stone. Grandma Rose's clear words, her selfless intention, were now warped into the catalyst for my sister's deceit. It wasn't about money, not truly. It was about the carefully constructed illusion of family, of shared grief, of the bond I thought Eleanor and I had always had. That illusion was irrevocably shattered, lying in shards around me on Grandma's quiet living room floor, reflecting the pale, unforgiving moonlight. How do you confront someone who has so thoroughly rewritten reality, not just for themselves, but for you. My mind raced, frantically searching for a path forward that didn't involve complete destruction. Could I just put the will back? Pretend I never saw it? The thought was fleeting. I couldn't unsee this. I couldn't unknow this. The knowledge was a burning ember in my gut, demanding action, demanding truth. But what truth, and at what cost? To confront Eleanor was to unleash a storm, to rip open old wounds and create new, deeper ones. To ignore it was to become complicit in her lie, to betray Grandma Rose's dying wishes. I carefully refolded the will, tucking it back into its envelope, but not placing it back in the sewing box. No, it was too important to leave unsecured, too dangerous to let vanish again. My hand trembled as I slid it into my inner jacket pocket, feeling the crisp edges against my chest, a physical manifestation of the secret now weighing me down. The weight of it was suffocating. Eleanor was sleeping just down the hall, likely dreaming, oblivious to the fact that her carefully guarded secret was now an open wound in my own heart. The irony tasted bitter. A new kind of grief settled over me, distinct from the sorrow for Grandma. This was grief for the sister I thought I knew, for the trust that had evaporated, for the family dynamic that had seemingly been a lie. I pictured Eleanor's face earlier, her forced composure, her veiled eyes. Had she always been capable of this? Or had grief and perceived injustice twisted her into someone unrecognizable? The question swirled, a dizzying vortex of doubt and betrayal. Sleep was an impossible concept now. The first rays of dawn were beginning to streak across the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of gray and rose, a gentle mockery of the turmoil raging inside me. Soon, Eleanor would wake. Soon, I would have to face her, armed with this devastating truth. The silence of the house no longer felt mournful. It felt like a silent countdown. Each tick of Grandma's antique clock amplified the dread, pushing me towards an inevitable collision. There was no escaping this. My heart pounded, a drumbeat against the stillness, marking the slow, painful approach of a reckoning I never wanted. The first blush of morning touched the window panes, painting the room in hues of soft gray and the palest rose. I hadn't moved from the living room, a silent sentinel, the folded will a constant, crushing presence in my jacket pocket. Every rustle of the old house, every distant bird call, felt amplified, pushing me closer to the inevitable. My throat was dry, my heart a trapped bird hammering against my ribs. I needed coffee, a moment of clarity, but there was no escaping the confrontation now. The sun was rising, and with it, the truth. A soft creak echoed from the hallway, then the shuffle of slippers on the old wood floor. Eleanor. My stomach lurched. She would expect a normal morning, perhaps another day of quiet grief and evasive whispers, but normalcy was a luxury we could no longer afford. I stood as she entered the living room, her usually neat hair a little disheveled, her eyes still heavy with sleep. She paused, surprised to find me awake, lingering by the threshold. "Alex," she murmured, her voice still thick with slumber. "What are you doing up so early? Couldn't sleep?" She tried a small, sympathetic smile, a mask I now saw right through. The sight of it, the feigned innocence, sparked a cold anger in my gut. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about the years of shared history, the assumption of honesty between us. My voice, when it came, was surprisingly steady, though it felt alien in the pre-dawn quiet. "We need to talk, Ellie, about Grandma." My gaze held hers, unwavering, watching for the flicker of recognition, the telltale shift. It came, subtle but undeniable. Her eyelids narrowed almost imperceptibly, the sleepiness instantly evaporating, replaced by a defensive guard. Her shoulders tensed, drawing inward. "What about Grandma?" she asked, her tone now brittle, a sharp contrast to her earlier softness. She feigned a yawn, trying to regain control. "We've talked plenty, Alex. It's hard enough without rehashing everything. We're grieving." Her words, once a shield, now felt like thinly veiled accusations. She was trying to turn my legitimate concern into an emotional burden, a manipulation I was no longer willing to accept. "No, Eleanor, not about grieving. I replied, stepping further into the dim light. The will felt like a lead weight against my chest. It's about what Grandma wanted, what she left for us. I watched her eyes dart to the empty shelf where the sewing box usually sat. A flicker of panic crossed her face, quick as a hummingbird's wing, then gone, replaced by a forced calm that was almost theatrical. I already told you, Alex, there's nothing from Mr. Henderson yet, she insisted, her voice gaining an edge of impatience. Her hands began to nervously wring together, a habit she'd had since childhood whenever she was caught in a lie. It's too soon. You're fixating. Grandma was clear. Everything was simple. No surprises. The carefully rehearsed lie hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This was it. Are you absolutely sure about that, Eleanor? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Yet it cut through the silence like a knife. With slow, deliberate movements, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the cream-colored envelope, its edges slightly creased from my grip. The moonlight, now fading, still caught the bold, undeniable script on the front. Last will and testament of Rose Eleanor Vance. Her eyes fixated on the envelope, widening in pure, unadulterated shock. The color drained from her face, leaving it ashen, almost translucent. Her jaw went slack, and the carefully constructed composure crumbled, revealing the raw, panicked fear beneath. Where did you get that? She stammered, her voice a reedy gasp, her eyes flitting from the document in my hand to my face, then back again, desperate for an escape. Where do you think I got it, Eleanor? I retorted, the words laced with a bitter irony. Exactly where Grandma Rose said she kept her copy. In the sewing box. I held it out, not offering it to her, but simply presenting it as undeniable evidence. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by Eleanor's ragged breathing. Her denial, so steadfast moments before, was now a shattered mirror, reflecting her betrayal. Her face contorted, a horrifying mix of rage, shame, and desperation. "You snooped!" she shrieked, her voice cracking, the accusation echoing sharply in the quiet house. She pointed a trembling finger at me, her eyes burning with a wild, cornered animal's fury. "You went through her things. You invaded her privacy. How could you, Alex? After everything?" Her words were a desperate deflection, a pathetic attempt to shift the blame, to make me the villain. "Invaded her privacy?" I shot back, the control I'd held onto beginning to fray. "She put it there so it would be found, Eleanor. She wanted her wishes honored, not buried and forgotten by her own granddaughter." The crumpled envelope felt like a weapon, heavy with the weight of her deceit. The sister I knew, the one I had loved and trusted, was gone, replaced by a stranger consumed by greed and fear. Eleanor recoiled, her face a mask of distorted features, her eyes narrowed into angry slits. "Buried and forgotten? You think I forgot her wishes? I was here, Alex. I was here every single week. You just parachuted in for the funeral, didn't you? You didn't see what it was like, the endless appointments, the decline, the changes she made." Her voice rose to a shrill crescendo, raw and untamed, finally letting slip the true bitterness that had festered beneath her composed exterior. A hollow laugh escaped me, devoid of humor. "Changes? You mean the one where she gave the cottage to Robert? The one she lovingly explained in a handwritten note saying he needed a fresh start?" I watched her, my heart aching with the realization that this wasn't just about a house, but about her own deep-seated resentment, her perceived ownership of Grandma's affection and legacy. The morning light, now brighter, unforgivingly illuminated the raw hurt and anger etched onto her face. "Fresh start?" she spat, the word dripping with disdain. "He's always needed a fresh start. He's a lost cause. He'll squander it, Alex. You know he will. She was just being sentimental. She didn't understand. She always trusted me to make things right, to protect her legacy." Her words were a torrent, a desperate self-justification that tore at the last threads of our shared history. She wasn't defending Grandma. She was defending her own twisted interpretation of what was right. My gaze sharpened, piercing through the veil of her anger. "And what about her trust in us, Eleanor? In our bond? She wanted no squabbles, only love. She explicitly told us where to find her copy. This wasn't some casual whim. This was her final, clear intention. And you decided, in your infinite wisdom, to disregard it, to hide it, to lie to me. The accusation hung heavy in the air, a bell tolling the end of our unsuspecting relationship. She staggered back, as if physically struck by my words. It wasn't a lie. It was protecting her, protecting us, from ourselves, from Robert's foolishness. Don't you see? I was just trying to fix it. Her hands flailed, a desperate, almost pathetic gesture of self-defense. The tremor that had been in her fingers earlier was now a full-body shudder, revealing the fear that underpinned her rage. Fix what, Eleanor? Her kindness? Her compassion? I demanded, my voice rising to match hers, the quiet house now a stage for our unraveling. You didn't fix anything. You broke it. You broke Grandma's trust, and you broke mine. What kind of person does this? What kind of sister? Each question was a hammer blow, aiming for the core of her carefully constructed self-image. Tears welled in her eyes, not tears of sorrow, but of frustrated fury. I'm sorry you feel that way, Alex, but I did what I thought was best. You're being melodramatic. It's a piece of paper, a house. We're family. She tried to step closer, as if to appeal, to touch, but I instinctively recoiled, a chasm now between us that felt miles wide. Her words were empty, hollow reassurances that held no comfort. Family doesn't lie to each other, Eleanor. Family doesn't betray the dying wishes of someone they claim to love, I stated, my voice low and steady now, a chilling calm replacing the fraying anger. The cream envelope still clutched in my hand felt like a silent, powerful judge. Its presence was undeniable, an unassailable truth in the face of her crumbling facade. Her shoulders slumped, the fight draining from her, leaving behind only a raw, exposed vulnerability. She looked utterly defeated, not by my arguments, but by the irrefutable evidence of her own actions. The carefully crafted mask of the grieving sister finally shattered, revealing the desperate, fearful woman underneath. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with the weight of unspoken resentments and undeniable truths. A profound, suffocating silence descended, absorbing the last echoes of our raised voices. Eleanor stood utterly still, her shoulders hunched, her head bowed. The vibrant anger had drained from her face, leaving it pale and drawn, etched with a raw, desolate vulnerability I hadn't seen since we were children. She wasn't looking at me, nor at the document I still held. Her gaze was fixed on some invisible point on the floor, as if all her carefully constructed defenses had simply crumbled beneath her feet. The quiet wasn't a truce. It was the chilling aftermath of a war that had claimed a casualty, our relationship. A single fat tear escaped her eye, tracing a path down her cheek, shining in the burgeoning light. It wasn't the furious, frustrated tears from moments before, but a slow, weary drop of pure despair. It spoke volumes, more eloquently than any apology or outburst could. The rigid defiance that had marked her every word evaporated, revealing a profound exhaustion, as if carrying this secret had finally broken her. I saw it then, not just the betrayer, but the sister who was lost, trapped in her own misguided conviction. I couldn't, she whispered, her voice barely audible, a ragged breath. She still didn't look up. I couldn't let her throw it all away, not to him. Her words were laced with a desperate, pathetic justification, a lingering residue of her delusion. It wasn't a true apology, not yet, but a glimpse into the depths of her fear and resentment. It wasn't about malice. It was about a twisted, possessive love that blinded her to Grandma's true intentions. My own anger, which had burned so hot, began to recede, replaced by a cold, aching sadness. The sight of her brokenness didn't bring triumph. It brought a fresh wave of grief for what we had lost. The sister who would prank me, the one who shared secrets under whispered blankets, that Eleanor felt impossibly distant now. This woman, slumped and defeated, was a stranger wearing a familiar face. The will in my hand felt less like a weapon and more like a tombstone, marking the death of our shared innocence. Ellie, I began, my voice hoarse, stripped of its earlier accusation. Grandma didn't throw it away. She gave it with love. She always loved Robert. She always loved us. She just wanted to help him. I tried to inject some of Grandma's gentle spirit into the stark reality of the situation, to remind her of the boundless empathy that defined Grandma Rose, and not the perceived slight. She finally raised her eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, meeting mine. There was no anger left, only a profound, bottomless shame. "I know," she choked out, a raw sound that tore at my heart. "I know she did. But it felt like she chose him over us. After everything. After all I did for her. It wasn't fair, Alex. It wasn't right." Her voice cracked on the last words, revealing the childish, wounded core of her actions. It was not about logic, but about a primal sense of injustice, a perceived betrayal of her own loyalty. The silence that followed stretched, filled with the unspoken weight of years of unspoken expectations, of rivalries we'd never acknowledged. I looked at the old photographs on the mantelpiece, snapshots of holidays and birthdays, of childhood innocence, all of us smiling, oblivious to the cracks that would someday spiderweb through our foundations. The warmth of those memories felt like a cruel mockery in the face of the cold, hard present. Our past, once solid, now felt porous, tainted by this revelation. I wanted to say more, to demand answers, to shake her until the lies fell away and the true sister emerged. But what more was there to say? The truth was out, stark and undeniable. The trust was shattered. There was no going back to the naive belief that our family was perfectly unified, perfectly honest. The very fabric of our relationship had been irrevocably altered. The quiet house, once a sanctuary of grief, now felt like a courtroom, and the verdict had been delivered. The dawn outside deepened, painting the sky with bolder strokes of pink and gold, promising a new day that neither of us felt ready for. The light, once a welcome sign of the truth, now felt harsh, illuminating the raw edges of our pain. Eleanor stood frozen, a statue of regret, and I, holding the crumpled evidence of her betrayal, felt the immense crushing weight of a family broken. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the deafening echoes of a lifetime of unspoken truths, finally laid bare. A profound, suffocating silence descended, absorbing the last echoes of our raised voices. Eleanor stood utterly still, her shoulders hunched, her head bowed. The vibrant anger had drained from her face, leaving it pale and drawn, etched with a raw, desolate vulnerability I hadn't seen since we were children. She wasn't looking at me, nor at the document I still held. Her gaze was fixed on some invisible point on the floor, as if all her carefully constructed defenses had simply crumbled beneath her feet. The quiet wasn't a truce. It was the chilling aftermath of a war that had claimed a casualty, our relationship. A single fat tear escaped her eye, tracing a path down her cheek, shining in the burgeoning light. It wasn't the furious, frustrated tears from moments before, but a slow, weary drop of pure despair. It spoke volumes, more eloquently than any apology or outburst could. The rigid defiance that had marked her every word evaporated, revealing a profound exhaustion, as if carrying this secret had finally broken her. I saw it then, not just the betrayer, but the sister who was lost, trapped in her own misguided conviction. I couldn't," she whispered, her voice barely audible, a ragged breath. She still didn't look up. "I couldn't let her throw it all away. Not to him." Her words were laced with a desperate, pathetic justification, a lingering residue of her delusion. It wasn't a true apology, not yet, but a glimpse into the depths of her fear and resentment. It wasn't about malice. It was about a twisted, possessive love that blinded her to Grandma's true intentions. My own anger, which had burned so hot, began to recede, replaced by a cold, aching sadness. The sight of her brokenness didn't bring triumph. It brought a fresh wave of grief for what we had lost. The sister who would prank me, the one who shared secrets under whispered blankets, that Eleanor felt impossibly distant now. This woman, slumped and defeated, was a stranger wearing a familiar face. The will in my hand felt less like a weapon and more like a tombstone, marking the death of our shared innocence. "Ellie," I began, my voice hoarse, stripped of its earlier accusation. "Grandma didn't throw it away. She gave it with love. She always loved Robert. She always loved us. She just wanted to help him." I tried to inject some of Grandma's gentle spirit into the stark reality of the situation, to remind her of the boundless empathy that defined Grandma Rose, and not the perceived slight. She finally raised her eyes, red-rimmed and swollen, meeting mine. There was no anger left, only a profound, bottomless shame. "I know," she choked out, a raw sound that tore at my heart. "I know she did. But it felt like she chose him over us. After everything, after all I did for her, it wasn't fair, Alex. It wasn't right." Her voice cracked on the last words, revealing the childish, wounded core of her actions. It was not about logic, but about a primal sense of injustice, a perceived betrayal of her own loyalty. The silence that followed stretched, filled with the unspoken weight of years of unspoken expectations, of rivalries we'd never acknowledged. I looked at the old photographs on the mantelpiece, snapshots of holidays and birthdays, of childhood innocence, all of us smiling, oblivious to the cracks that would someday spiderweb through our foundations. The warmth of those memories felt like a cruel mockery in the face of the cold, hard present. Our past, once solid, now felt porous, tainted by this revelation. I wanted to say more, to demand answers, to shake her until the lies fell away and the true sister emerged. But what more was there to say? The truth was out, stark and undeniable. The trust was shattered. There was no going back to the naive belief that our family was perfectly unified, perfectly honest. The very fabric of our relationship had been irrevocably altered. The quiet house, once a sanctuary of grief, now felt like a courtroom, and the verdict had been delivered. The dawn outside deepened, painting the sky with bolder strokes of pink and gold, promising a new day that neither of us felt ready for. The light, once a welcome sign of the truth, now felt harsh, illuminating the raw edges of our pain. Eleanor stood frozen, a statue of regret, and I, holding the crumpled evidence of her betrayal, felt the immense crushing weight of a family broken. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the deafening echoes of a lifetime of unspoken truths, finally laid bare.